But let's dive into Nebraska versus Iowa. When you look at, all right, the couple of games that Dana Holgorsen has called versus the previous games, let's look specifically at Wisconsin. That's the most amount of points Nebraska has scored in a football game since they dropped 56 on Northwestern in 2021. All right, and obviously the most points scored in the Matt Rule era. That's been talked about plenty. But you talk about the whole entire 2024 season leading up to Wisconsin. Yards per play. Ooh, that dreaded yards per play stat was 4.8 versus the Badgers. Statistically, the third best defense we've played all year. 6.4 yards per play. Points per game, 22. Literally doubled that, 44 versus Wisconsin. Again, this is one game. One game. I did say, look for there to be the biggest jump from game one, as Dana Holgorsen is the OC, to game two. I did say that. Did I predict that we would do what we did versus Wisconsin? I said it would be a butt-ugly duckling little game, and hopefully we'd find a way to win, and I couldn't be happy to be more wrong about how the game went, and I couldn't be happy to be more right about the jump. It was just a much larger jump than I could have ever reasonably imagined. All right, but 22 points per game versus Wisconsin, double that, 44 yards per pass, 6.4 to 7.7 on the season versus the Wisconsin game was 7.7 in yards per rush. So I've been talking about 2.8. That was the 4 games leading up to the USC game. But on the season, Nebraska was averaging 3.5 yards per rush against Wisconsin. At halftime, it was actually 6.0. By the end of the game, it was 5.0 in just 2 games. All right, with Dana Holgorsen, quarterback Dylan Raiola has reversed his previously declining QBR, jumping from 79th in the country to 63rd in the rankings. That's a large jump in just 2 games. Now, here's a stat I don't understand why it hasn't been talked about more. So Corn Crazed, if you follow him on YouTube, he said this. And I haven't heard anyone else say it. So I'm going to say it. Credit Connor Hayden. But I'm going to say it. Emmett Johnson had more total yards Saturday than any player in the Big Ten has had in a game since Saquon Barkley in 2016. How is that not the headline to every frickin' paper since last Saturday? All right. Now, Dana Holgorsen likes Ja'Cory Barney. A lot of people like Ja'Cory Barney. Matt Rule liked Ja'Cory Barney. Marcus Satterfield liked to give it to him on sweeps and such. But beyond that, I think one reason Dana Holgorsen likes Ja'Cory Barney, Big Ten Freshman of the Week, he sees Tavon Austin. If you remember Tavon Austin for West Virginia, for the Rams, a first-round pick, Ja'Cory Barney could be potentially, if I'm Dana Holgorsen, I'm looking at the quarterback I've got, I'm looking at the next Tavon Austin, which is Ja'Cory Barney. I'm looking at certain things, and unless I'm getting a head coaching offer somewhere else, why would I want to go anywhere else be here at Nebraska next year? But I don't want to put the cart before the horse. All right. Final thoughts on the Wisconsin game. 50% of our yards. Again, I was not here on Monday to put a nail in this coffin. Then we'll project ahead to Iowa. 50% of our yards versus Wisconsin came from the running backs on simple handoffs or short passes out of the backfield. Now, if you think about why he would do that, you got a quarterback who's young, who's a teenager still, overthinking a lot of things. Well, let's simplify. When you do things like that and you stress the defense the way Holgorsen's offense can stress the defense, can they do it again versus Iowa? I don't know. We'll see. Can they do it more than once? Any dog can have its day. Anybody can show up every once in a while. Can you do it again? That's my question. But if you want to make Dylan Raiola's life easier, the thing I just mentioned, 50% of our yards versus Wisconsin coming from the running backs on simple handoffs or short passes out of the backfield, that's a way to do it. Dana Holgorsen, he mentioned, and I quote, "I had more fun Saturday than I've had in a long time," talking about the Wisconsin game. All right, let's see what I got here next. The temperature tonight's going to be a wee bit chilly. 20 degrees at kickoff is what I've been told. Going to get on down into the teens. Big Ten weather, baby. It is interesting to me because I think about Dylan Raiola. Played in Phoenix. Played in Georgia. Now he's got relatives who played in Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Detroit. But those relatives also were not quarterbacks. They were linemen. I wonder how Dylan Raiola is going to respond playing in the coldest game he's ever played in his life, probably by far. Now, one thing I do like, and I would go to practices in the past, and I didn't make much of this because sometimes I just don't want to bring things up, but they would practice indoors all the time. I'd walk out there and we're getting ready to play Iowa or Wisconsin in November, and they'd be inside the Hawk Center. And I remember thinking, are we going to play the game in the Hawk Center? Why are we indoors? In about 3 days, we're going to be outside in that stadium. What I'm getting at is Matt Rule has his team 19 out of 20 practices. He has his team practicing outside, which I don't know why that's something that needs to be pointed out, but because it hasn't happened consistently in the past, it's something that was going to benefit this team, and it's going to benefit Dylan Raiola as well, because when you're used to something, it's not as big a deal. Even if you haven't played a game in it before, at least you've been practicing in it day in and day out. All right, now since 2018, Iowa has only finished with more than 4 losses once. If they lose to Nebraska, they could potentially end up with 6 losses potentially this year. All right, which would be the most they've had since 2014. I'd love to give them a helping hand in such a cause. It should be noted that Iowa's top defensive back is sitting out the game. All right, Iowa, the defensive coordinator has been there 20-plus years, longer than Dylan Raiola has been alive. He's been running basically the same defense, a lot of zone, a lot of quarters. They will match up man-to-man every once in a while just to mix it up. But this is good for Nebraska. We have struggled in one-on-one matchups. We have struggled against man-to-man. Dylan's not a guy who's going to take off consistently, so you don't have to worry about containing him, which man-to-man does not do a good job of. But when you have guys who can't get open and win the one-on-one battle in pass routes, that hurts you. Well, Iowa likes to do zone. They like to do quarters. Nebraska's best passing outputs this year in games have been versus zone defenses. So I'm hopeful that that's going to help us. You look at Iowa's quarterbacks. All right, Jackson Stratton, is he still projected to get the start tonight? All right. Yep. I've talked about him in the past. Jackson Stratton. But when you look at all 3 quarterbacks, Cade McNamara, Brendan Sullivan, all 3 have started this year. Iowa's 3 quarterbacks this year only totaled about 1,500 yards passing. That's it. Dylan's got about twice that. Leads all true freshmen in America. All right. And only 8 touchdowns. Honestly, if you look at that, it's very similar to how Nebraska's passing stats were last year when it comes to total yardage, touchdowns. They haven't thrown near as many interceptions. In fact, they're number 1 in the Big Ten when it comes to takeaways. Iowa is number 1 in turnover margin, number 1 in least amount of penalties. Like, they don't beat themselves. But their quarterback play has not been great. Their running back play, pretty good. Statistically, I don't know if you knew this, Jake, Caleb Johnson, is ranked 2nd in the nation statistically to only Ashton Jeanty, who's going to be in the Heisman ceremony, final ceremony up in New York. Either him or Travis is going to win that thing. He's only 2nd in the nation to Ashton Jeanty, who's probably going to break Barry Sanders' record that Barry has held, total yards, total offense, whatever the case may be, since 1988 when he won the Heisman. In my opinion, the single greatest season a running back has ever had in the history of college football. All right. So the key to the game might be stopping the run. Just maybe. All right, Iowa's defense is much better against the run than they are the pass. They are much better at rushing the passer than Wisconsin. All right, Wisconsin only had 4 hurries the entire game versus the Huskers. 0 knockdowns, 0 sacks. Nebraska's O-line played their best game of the year. It was improved in the run blocking, much better in the pass pro. That being said, while Iowa's secondary, there's some weaknesses to be had. They are much better at stopping the run, but they are much better at getting after the quarterback. Their DBs just aren't great. They've allowed 6 quarterbacks to throw for over 200 yards on them this year. Okay, and as I mentioned, they win by winning the turnover and penalty battle, running the ball, stopping the run. They have 6 fumble recoveries, their defense does, and 16 INTs. They're plus 11 in turnover margin in the Big Ten. All right. Nebraska on the year is plus 1. They were minus 17 last year, and during our 4-game losing streak, which is so far behind us now, they were minus 7. So turnovers would be another big key. Stopping the run, turnovers. Who's going to win that battle? Special teams. Iowa is 50 spots higher than Nebraska in net punting and kick return yardage, and 80 spots higher in punt returns. And their kicker, Drew Stevens, made 5 field goals, went 5 for 5 in their last game versus Maryland. Now, here's what I would say when it comes to special teams. I think if you look at the stats as a whole on the season, Iowa unequivocally has the advantage. But if you look at the last 3 to 4 games, our coverage units have been much better. We got Ja'Cory Barney back there finally. Why hasn't this been happening all year? Okay, why aren't we starting Emmett Johnson? Why don't we have Ja'Cory Barney returning? Why don't we have Heinrich Harburg in the red zone? Logical things are finally happening on offense. So I'm happy to see that. My point is our special teams, I'm not going to say that they're all world. At one point this year, I just asked for them to be slightly below average. Can we just upgrade significantly to slightly below average? Remember that, Jake? That's all I wanted.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think we're average? I think we're average at this point.
Yeah,
average
so.
on.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can look at the special teams as a whole this year. I think you look at the last 3 or 4 games, and Iowa probably still has a slight edge, but it's not gargantuan like it is if you look at the entire season as a whole. Now, the question is, can Nebraska keep it up? Can they keep up the consistency? John Holes made 8 straight field goals in a row. Can we keep it up? No big returns, good protection on field goals and punt protection. We got a block against USC in our field goal block unit. Like, we're better. Can we keep it up? All right. I mentioned this. Iowa's defensive coordinator has been at Iowa longer than Dylan Raiola has been alive. But I think it's going to be a great matchup between Phil, Iowa's defensive coordinator, and Dana Holgorsen. It's a matchup I'm excited to see. Here's a random little nugget. The only game played Thanksgiving weekend in 1963 was what game, Jake? Jake's Trivia Challenge.
Nebraska, Iowa?
No. You know better than that. Not Nebraska, Iowa.
Nebraska, Oklahoma.
Nebraska, I even helped you out there, my friend.
Yeah.
I knew you knew better than Nebraska, Iowa. All right, Nebraska versus Oklahoma. It was due to the assassination of JFK on Friday. This game decided who won the Big 8 title. Number 10, Nebraska defeated number 6, Oklahoma, 29-28 to claim its first conference title. Check this, in 23 years. Random stat for you. All right, talking about Iowa's rush defense being good. They're number 1 in the country when it comes to allowing rushing touchdowns. In other words, they've allowed the fewest rushing touchdowns in America, have the Hawkeyes. The team that's allowed the second fewest amount of rushing touchdowns. I'm going to give you a chance to reprieve yourself. Jake, who is it?
The second fewest rushing touchdowns?
Yep.
Oh, man, early in the season I had known this.
Don't overthink it.
Iowa.
They're number 1.
Oh, Nebraska. Okay, yeah.
Yes. Oh, my goodness, dude.
So I thought you said Nebraska because okay, yeah.
In fairness to Jake, I just kind of throw it at him at random moments. It's not quite fair. Yeah, number 2 in the country and least amount of rushing touchdowns allowed is Nebraska. So 1 and 2 are going to face each other tonight. We seem to have found our starting running back. They've got one of the top 2 in the country, at least statistically. It's going to be ground game versus ground game. It's going to be rush defense versus rush defense. It's going to be Big Ten, cold weather. By the way, all them Southern Bells coming up in the college football playoff starts. I can't wait to see the Big Ten teams hosting all them Southern Bells. All right. Cart before the horse, but that's all right. One person text, I saved the text. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath in the trenches. I love that. Let's see what else we've got here. That may cover just about everything. Dylan Raiola finished with 293 yards, completed 74% of his passes, and averaged 8 yards. Season high, by the way, outside of UTEP. 8 yards per pass attempt. 75% of the time. I'm curious to see if this holds up and holds true, and I'm okay if it is. Maybe it's telegraphing what we're going to do. Maybe it's called having an identity, but 75% of the time that Dante Dowdell is in the game, it's a run play. Here's what I care about. I'm glad they're finally specifically using him in short yardage and goal line situations because it makes the most freaking sense. All right, Phil Parker is Wisconsin's defensive coordinator. I only said Phil earlier. All right, but it's Phil Parker. Again, he's been their D coordinator longer than Dylan's been alive, but that's okay. It's going to be a great matchup with Phil and Dana Holgorsen tonight, OC versus DC, Nebraska versus Iowa's defense versus our offense.